What's going on, everybody, and welcome back. Today we're going to discuss a very frequently asked question that's been asked to me and been asked to a lot of different people, and that is, can you live off of just CrossFit? We have a loaded question. Can you survive off of CrossFit? Can you live off it? Can you make a livelihood off of it? And that's not really a binary question of a yes or a no. It really deserves some kind of breakdown from there. So we're going to take the idea of, can you live off of CrossFit, and break it down to four distinct questions. And those four distinct kind of questions or topics are really directly correlated to an actual job. I say an actual job, right? So we have CrossFit over here, which are trying to kind of see, can we live off of it? And then we have an actual salaried position over here. And so we need to take some kind of lines per se and kind of directly correlate them to an actual job and see how they compare. So the first thing we're going to discuss is primary source of income. And some people don't really know how CrossFitters make money. And so we're going to discuss, first of all, how do CrossFitters make money primarily? Then the second thing we're going to discuss is, can you survive? Like, knowing you have a primary source of income, could you survive off of that salary you make off of CrossFit? Then from there, we're going to get into some comparisons to actual jobs. A job, you can get a raise. You can ask your boss for a raise. So how are some ways that CrossFitters can get a raise in their job? Then the fourth and final thing is the idea of a retirement plan or an injury plan. So it's the idea of, okay, you might not be able to compete forever, right? So let's set yourself up for success. What are some other branches or areas of revenue that CrossFitters can make that doesn't necessarily directly correlate one-to-one to they have to compete on a day in and day out basis? So those are the four things we're going to get into, so let's get started. Number one, what is the primary source of income for CrossFitters? Primary source of income, whether you're paid yearly or by a product deliverable or by month, is through sponsors. Whether you're sponsored by, for instance, myself, whether I'm sponsored by Nike or I'm not sponsored by Fit8 or RPM, whatever the case may be, a CrossFitter competing at a high level has some company or some companies that have reached out to them and are sponsoring something that they use, something that they wear, something that they eat, something that they use supplementation-wise, maybe a programming they follow. There's a lot of different ways, different outlets or companies that CrossFitters can be sponsored by in order to make an income. And that's going to be their primary source of income, is through sponsors. Question number two. Can a CrossFitter survive off of their primary source of income through their sponsors? And we're going to take, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to assume that this CrossFitter has signed contracts with all their sponsors and they're a year long. So he's kind of almost, he or she is guaranteed a salary per se, assuming they don't do anything stupid, right? So they have a salary. So we're going to take that salaried number and put it in an actual W-2 job. So now we're going to compare this W-2 salary to this 1099 quote-unquote salary, and we're going to look at take-home pay from both the W-2 and the 1099 after we subtract income tax, after we subtract health insurance, after we subtract a retirement plan. Now, I want to caveat and say that these numbers are based on 2019 averages, and I am no expert in the field. So if you disagree with them, that's completely fine. So let's get started. The first thing we have to do when approaching this problem is define some givens. So fact number one, the salary for the CrossFitter, what they're making off sponsors, is the same as the job, the W-2. And we're going to say that's $50,000 or $50K. The next thing we're going to say is the person here and here, they're both single. They're not married. The first thing we're going to look over when determining what's the take-home pay for a CrossFitter compared to a W-2 position is income tax. So if you're working a W-2 position, you're looking at a 20% deduction from your paycheck. If you're a 1099 and working a full-time CrossFitter, doing CrossFit stuff, you're losing 15%. Next up is insurance. So if you work a W-2 job, usually your employer pays a percentage of your insurance. I looked it up, and I think it was somewhere between 60 to 80%, and in 2019, it was an 80%. Your employer pays 80% of your health insurance or insurance at the time. Whereas if you are a 1099 or just doing CrossFit full-time, you're paying 100% of your insurance by yourself. You don't have an employer covering your 80% where then you're only paying 20. Instead, you're paying 100% of your insurance over here, which is a huge disadvantage to being a 1099 or trying to be a full-time CrossFitter. The last thing to discuss when determining your take-home pay is the idea of retirement. it is usually suggested that you give 10 to 15% of your paycheck to your 401k plan, retirement plan, to make sure you have a good, solid future after you're done working or after you're done CrossFitting. So we're going to assume that you're going to give 15% of your paycheck to your retirement plan for both the CrossFitter and for the full-time position. Now you might think to yourself, okay, well it's the same, so there's really no difference. And that's not true, because usually what happens if you have a good employer is your employer will match your 401k or what you put into your retirement plan up to a certain percentage. So on average, I think in 2019, you were looking at your employer will match what you put into your retirement plan up to like 5 or 6%. So what that means is for every dollar you put in up to 5 or 6%, they're usually matching it on the dollar, 1 to 1. And so if they're doing that, then if you're giving 15% of your paycheck to your retirement plan from your full-time job, and your job is matching you up to 5 or 6%, 1 to 1, then you're actually putting more money into your retirement in the W-2, whereas you don't have an employer over here in the CrossFit realm. So when you put your 15% in there, it's just the 15%. There's nothing added extra to it. Now to answer that overall second question is, can a CrossFitter just survive off of their primary source of income being just sponsors, right? And so if we look at the numbers, the take-home pay for a full-time job guy after he gets all his income, tax, and his health insurance and his retirement is $31,500. And then the CrossFitter's take-home pay after all his deductions is $28,000. And so the question is, can you survive off of that? And I would probably say you probably could. I would also caveat and say it is not a glamorous way to live, obviously, and it's probably going to require a lot of financial planning. And what I mean by that is a lot of budgeting. You're budgeting, you're not going out to Chipotle all the time. You're budgeting in a lot of different things to help you out. And so that's the answer to the second question of, can they survive off of it? But now I kind of want to get into, okay, can a CrossFitter survive off of just their basic salary or their basic sponsors? But what are some ways if the CrossFitter wants to improve their sponsors or improve their ability to make money, how do they do that? And that is question we're going to answer number 3 is, how do CrossFitters get a raise? If you're working a full-time job and you got a raise, what that essentially means is you've done an exceptionally good job at what you've been called to do or hired to do or whatever your job title is. So how do you compare that back to a CrossFitter? How do they get a raise? And there's really, I think, 3 different ways. So 3 topics we're going to discuss about how a CrossFitter can get a raise. Number 1 is performance-based, right? So they can do really, really well and end up going to a sanctional and winning some money, or going to the games and winning money, or whatever the case may be, and they get some bonus pay from that event. They pay out from that event. And that's one way for a CrossFitter to make money. The second way for a CrossFitter to get a raise on top of what they're already making is the idea of renegotiation. So we made the assumption that a CrossFitter had sponsors, right? They have some sponsors in their back pocket. But the real question is, do these sponsors love working with them? And do they have a good, essentially, relationship with them? Because at some point, these sponsors, their contract is going to end with this CrossFitter, with this athlete. And so when the contract ends, the athlete, of course, has the option, and the company has the option of cutting ties and not working with them again, and then also re-signing them at the same amount, or possibly maybe bumping it up. And so the question comes down to, has the athlete done a good job of marketing the ability that, hey, I work with this company. Like, for instance, I work with RPM Fitness. RPM Fitness makes the best jump rope in the world. And so my hopes is that in the future, when I have to renegotiate my contract with RPM, they can be like, hey, Jacob, we love working with you. You really show off our brand really well. You really represent our family really well. Like, you're really good at what you do. We really like having you around. So the goal is that, hey, we want to keep working with you, so we're going to re-sign a contract. And now, because of it, we want to keep you around. We're going to sign you for a little bit more because we really feel like you're integral and a part of the team. And so that's the second way a CrossFitter can get a raise, is renegotiating their contracts. The third way for a CrossFitter to make a raise is to sign new contracts. And this isn't like a renegotiation. Instead, this is a net new sponsor. And so a prime example is the idea of CBD. CBD, probably like 5 or 6 years ago, wasn't big in CrossFit whatsoever. Now you see it all over the place in CrossFitters because it really helps with inflammation. I mean, what we put our bodies through in the gym is really tough. And so it's really helpful for our bodies to have that inner system. So one of my sponsors is Pure Spectrum. I did not have that sponsor. I was not sponsored by a CBD company a year ago. And so I signed with Pure Spectrum recently in the past couple of months, and that essentially was a raise for me. I signed a contract with them. They pay me per month. I promote their products, not only because I like being paid, but also because I was already using their products and I loved using it. And so that's the third way a CrossFitter can get a raise, is to go out and find new sponsors to fill the void, per se, and products that they love to use and would love to brand themselves around. The third overall topic is the idea of a retirement plan or an injury plan. So if you work a full-time job and you get injured, usually your job's not gonna fire you. If you do get fired at your job because you're injured, you might need to find a different job. And sometimes if you're injured, and like say I break a leg and I'm working a desk job at my full-time job, it doesn't really matter. I can still continue to work there. But the same cannot be said for CrossFit. If I break a leg, I'm not gonna continue to compete. I need to rehab this, I need to get surgery, I need to fix it. So my first word of advice for this is obviously find sponsors or find primary sources of income or sponsors that love you or love working with you regardless of your health at that time. They're always going to be in your back pocket. They're always going to be your greatest source of like, hey, you can do it, Jacob, even though you might be injured. You want to find sponsors that will always be there for you. So that's my first word of advice. Now I kind of want to get into, okay, what's your injury plan or your retirement plan for CrossFit in order to survive off of it? And really what it comes down to is in order to survive, in order to make CrossFit a full-time job, you have to make money, right? And so in order to make money, if you can't compete, then you need other sources of revenue, other sources of making money other than competing. So if we make the assumption that maybe I did surround myself with sponsors that I broke a leg and they were like, okay, well, we don't want to work with Jacob anymore. He broke his leg. He's not going to compete. We don't want him. Okay. So then my sponsors all drop me. Well, hopefully as an athlete, you set yourself up for success in the sport and you thought kind of in the future. You've had some foresight to say, okay, in case I get injured, I want to have some sources of revenue that I can depend on that don't necessarily always need to be me competing. Some examples of that are possibly running camps, right? You can run like, oh, hey, let's go train. Like Train with Rich is a great example. Rich Running does Train with Rich. If he got injured, he can still run Train with Rich camps. So running camps. Some other sources of revenue are making a programming company and selling programming, making up like a template and selling template programming to people. A YouTube channel is a viable source of income. There are a lot of different examples of sources of income or other revenue sources you can create. That way, if you get injured or you decide to be done with the sport, you're still set up for success. That way you can still make some money to possibly survive and make enough money to continue to live as a full-time CrossFitter. So now to answer the overall loaded question of can you survive off of just CrossFit? And I think in order to survive and in order to do well, if you marry up all these ideas we talked about and do them well, you can do it. And I think you can do it pretty decently. Now, can you survive off of just primary source of income being just your sponsors? Yes, it would require a lot of budgeting and probably a lot of chicken and rice every single night, morning, and lunch. Yes, but I think you could do it. Now, would it be more beneficial to take that primary source of income and then ask for raises, essentially? You know, go out and renegotiate contracts, go out and find new sponsors, go out and win competitions. Absolutely, that money added to your base salary is great. It will help out tremendously. Then on top of that, would that be even better if you went out and found and branched out and found new sources of income? You start up camps, you start a programming company, you do a YouTube channel, and you take all those branches of income and you add it into your base salary and your raise. I think if you add that all up together, you can most certainly live off of doing CrossFit full time. I appreciate you guys watching. If you have any comments or concerns or questions, put them down below. I'm not going to be mad if you disagree with me. If you disagree with me, put it down below. I'd be happy to continue the conversation of can you survive off of just CrossFit? And like I mentioned, the numbers I got for can a CrossFitter survive are averages based on 2019. And in no way do I claim that I'm an expert in the area. I'm just gleaning them off the internet. Other than that, guys, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you guys later. See ya.